If Chung Yu had known, he would have never taken public transportation. Caught in a heavy downpour, he was soaked nearly to the bone. Despite this, the young man still attended class, where the teacher introduced him as the new student. Being a rather handsome blonde with violet eyes, Chung Yu greeted everyone present, who unfortunately barely paid him any attention. After exchanging a few words with the teacher, the boy finally found an empty seat by the window. As he walked between the rows, the blonde noticed how the other students looked at him, with disapproval and even a touch of disdain. They whispered to one another, unable to fathom how the new guy could possibly sit with the most disliked student in the class. However, the moment the lesson ended, everyone rushed towards Chung Yu, eager to get to know him better. They bombarded him with questions, but the protagonist couldn't give them direct answers, so he decided it would be better to confuse them. And that's exactly what happened. His classmates exchanged puzzled glances, not understanding what the newcomer was talking about, until he suddenly asked who his deskmate was and why everyone seemed to fear him. The students' faces immediately changed, from cheerful to judgmental. They didn't know how to tell Chung Yu that their classmate was, to say the least, an odd person. His name was Jiang Su He, and in all 3 years of schooling, they had never once managed to have a single conversation with him. Moreover, during the last sports competition, when one of his teammates fell, he merely laughed, calling him a useless nobody. In short, Jiang Su, he was an incredibly unpleasant individual, and dealing with him was more trouble than it was worth. Chung Yu remained silent, offering no comment on the story. It held no significance for him, aside from satisfying his curiosity. Unexpectedly, the boys suggested the newcomer take a tour of the school, and without hesitation, he agreed. Meanwhile, Jiang Su He, who hadn't attended class, was sitting at home watching TV until his mother came in and turned it off, asking him to go to school. The brunette refused, prompting his mother to appeal to his sense of guilt, mentioning the risk of expulsion. But the boy wasn't listening. His mind was entirely consumed with the person he had been so desperately trying to find. So much time had passed, and yet all his efforts were in vain. Jiang Su. He had even started to believe that person might have been nothing more than a figment of his imagination. His parents, observing their son's dejected state, had nearly lost hope. For no matter what they tried, the boy would disappear for days on end, and when he finally returned, he would lock himself away in his room. Meanwhile, Chung Yu, along with the other boys, was exploring the school. They came across a boy in glasses who was upset over the death of a tree he had been caring for. The classmates couldn't understand why he wasted his time on something so trivial, especially in his final year of school. However, Chung Yu didn't find the activity strange at all. In fact, he wanted to help. Approaching the tree, he silently commanded it to live, using just a small amount of his own energy, when suddenly, someone called out to him loudly and unexpectedly. Jiang Su He's parents, who had finally managed to talk to their son again and convince him to go to school, couldn't suppress their smiles. They offered to drive him, but he declined. Jiang Su, he didn't want to argue with them again, so he simply agreed to go. Meanwhile, Chung Yu went to the library to collect his textbooks. As the teacher gathered the books, he praised the blonde for the excellent grades noted in his records and remarked that the books in their town were much simpler. So studying in this new place shouldn't pose any problems. There were so many books that the boy could barely carry them all back to class. Lost in thought, he didn't even notice when he bumped into someone in the hallway. That someone turned out to be Jiang Su He, who instantly grabbed Chung Yu by the wrist where a bracelet hung. He pulled the blonde closer, unable to believe his eyes. This was the very person he had been searching for. However, Chung Yu didn't recognize him, leaving him to gape in surprise and ask if they had met before. The brunette froze in place, not hearing any admiration or seeing any spark of recognition in Chung Yu's eyes. At first, he was even afraid that Chung Yu had forgotten him, so he was about to remind him of his real name. But before he could do so, one of the teachers suddenly called out to him sharply, appearing unexpectedly from behind. The man grabbed the student by the ear and dragged him into a classroom for a reprimand, leaving the blonde to watch them go in silence. Suddenly, a photograph that had fallen out of a book caught Chung Yu's attention. He crouched down, quickly picking it up before anyone else noticed, and began gathering the scattered books. Just then, a classmate approached to help him collect his things. Chung Yu thanked him but politely declined the assistance. In passing, the student decided to ask if Chung Yu really knew Jiang Su He. Plastering on a fake smile, the protagonist smirked, saying that the boy must have simply mistaken him for someone else. Meanwhile, Jiangsu, who was being berated by the teacher, who was truly angry with him for his negligent attitude toward his studies. The man lectured him about his grades and future university admissions, and for a moment, Jiangsu, he genuinely felt guilty. Bowing his head, he promised that it wouldn't happen again and that he wouldn't take such a long break from school. The teacher stared at the brunette, clearly showing disbelief in his words. Deciding the conversation was over, Jiangsu, he was about to leave when he was stopped and handed a stack of assignments to complete in order to catch up. By that time, Cheng Yu had returned to class and finally learned the name of the classmate who had tried to help him. He Ping An. The blonde felt a slight tension while talking to this boy, so he shifted the conversation to the schedule and asked what the next class would be. It turned out the next class was physical education, and in the next moment, another student burst into the room, announcing that the teacher had told everyone to head to the sports field. Everyone was thrilled by this news, though Cheng Yu didn't quite understand why, and he would soon have to find out for himself. Jiangsu He returned to an empty classroom where he noticed books on the desk next to his. He was surprised, since no one had ever wanted to sit beside him before, and from what he could guess, the new student, Cheng Yu, must be his seatmate, which delighted him. However, the brunette was still upset that Cheng Yu hadn't recognized him. In any case, he would explain everything to him soon, but for now, Jiangsu. He decided to start working on the assignments he had been given. The physical education class was in full swing, and it was the perfect opportunity for Cheng Yu to slip away and return to the classroom. The blonde asked He Ping An to inform the teacher that he would be gone for a little while, leaving him puzzled as Cheng Yu dashed off. In truth, the protagonist hadn't expected things to be this easy. He didn't even have to search for Jiangsu He since they were in the same class. Under the influence of magic, the brunette was fast asleep at his desk, and Cheng Yu took advantage of this moment to do what he needed to do. But suddenly, everything went awry, and the protagonist was unable to complete what he had started. Dispersing all the magic, the boy stepped away from the desk, watching as Jiangsu He began to wake. Not wanting to speak with him in the slightest, Cheng Yu decided to quietly slip away between the rows, but he was immediately spotted by a sharp, watchful eye. The blonde hoped he hadn't been noticed and hurried to leave silently, when suddenly, the bracelet on his wrist began to glow again. Jiangsu He, of course, saw Cheng Yu, leaving him with no choice but to freeze in place. Straightening up, the boy tried to act as if nothing had happened, casually stating that he had only come for a textbook. One would think the brunette might have fallen for his forced grin, but no. Jiangsu. He blocked his path, preventing him from leaving the classroom. He asked if it was true that Cheng Yu didn't remember him, but the latter stubbornly continued pretending not to know this boy. Unable to contain himself, Jiangsu he grabbed the blonde by the wrist, calling him by a different name. The protagonist panicked, trying to pull his hand away, insisting he didn't know what this was about and that they were certainly not acquainted. The brunette smirked, leaning closer to him, then suddenly lifting the blonde's wrist with the bracelet into the air. When asked whose bracelet it was, Cheng Yu lied, saying he had bought it at a roadside stall. Jiangsu he pretended to believe the lie, then casually asked about the birthmark on the blonde's ear, wondering if it had been there since birth. This time, the question crossed all boundaries, and the boy couldn't hold back his indignation. Yet Jiangsu he didn't care about his outrage in the slightest, for he was absolutely certain he had recognized his Yu, his beloved. Pulling the blonde into a tight embrace, the boy held him close. He was overjoyed that he had finally found him, after all the time spent searching. From such actions, the protagonist found it difficult to breathe, so he slowly tried to pull away. Jiangsu He loosened his grip slightly, then looked at Yu, stating that he was, in fact, Li Xixin. The magic Cheng Yu had tried to use while he had the chance failed and dissipated. The brunette continued asking if the boy remembered him, but Cheng Yu, frustrated, merely called him crazy. Unexpectedly, the bell rang, and the blonde hurried to pull away before they were caught in such an awkward position. Jiangsu He refused to let him go, and panic washed over Cheng Yu. If someone saw them together, they would assume they knew each other, and that would surely interfere with what he needed to do. Mustering all his physical strength, he shoved the brunette away, causing him to hit the desk behind him. Not daring to linger in the classroom any longer, the boy quickly made his way to the exit where his classmates found him. They wanted to ask what was going on and why he was in such a rush, but Cheng Yu deliberately ignored them, walking away. Inside the classroom, Jiangsu he was still processing what had just happened. A smile crept onto his face, a clear sign that all his suspicions had been confirmed. Yet the boy couldn't shake the sadness from his heart, knowing the blonde was still refusing to acknowledge him. Chung Yu, upon reaching the restroom, immediately burned the photograph he had taken, tossing its ashes into the toilet and flushing them away. His plan had failed yet again, so he decided to resort to extreme measures, dialing a familiar number. The lesson was in full swing. The teacher was explaining a complex math topic, one Chung Yu was certain no one in the class would understand. However, to his surprise, it was Jiang Su He who raised his hand to answer the teacher's question. The brunette responded flawlessly, without hesitation, and earned praise from the teacher, who confirmed the problem had indeed been difficult. Such extensive knowledge astonished Chung Yu. He never expected someone who skipped classes so often to be this smart. Suddenly, Jiang Su He smiled at him, causing the blonde to blush and turn away, fully convinced no one else would notice. But to his shock, all of his classmates turned as one, their surprised gazes fixed on the brunette. They had never seen him smile before. Fortunately, the rest of the lesson passed without incident, and when it ended, He Ping-an wanted to invite Chung Yu to hang out with the group. However, he immediately stopped when he saw Jiang Su He's gaze. Other students quickly left as well, not wanting to risk the boy's wrath. The protagonist instantly realized who was to blame for such a reaction and refused the brunette's offer to have dinner together. As it turned out, Jiang Su He followed Chung Yu all the way home, much to the latter's irritation. He abruptly stopped and turned around, asking why the boy was doing this, but the response was even more shocking. Jiang Su He's house was in the same direction. When they reached his building, the blonde could hardly believe that they lived in the same apartment block. But it seemed fate had played a cruel joke on him. Jiang Su He lived in the apartment right across from his. While the brunette was clearly pleased with this turn of events, Chung Yu certainly wasn't, which was made abundantly clear by the loud slam of the door in the other's face. Dialing a familiar number again, the boy could hardly contain his frustration. He couldn't understand why the spirit helper had chosen such a place for him to carry out his mission. The spirit tried to sincerely explain itself to His Highness, and when asked why they couldn't have rented a more expensive place, it turned out Chung Yu's account was nearly empty. The assistant tried to reassure him, promising to find new accommodations soon, but the blonde gave it exactly 1 week to be sorted out. Having received a satisfactory response, he also vowed to deal with the spirit once he completed the mission. Chung Yu had no intention of forgiving such a blunder. The spirit fell silent, bowing its head and trembling visibly, and with that, the conversation ended. Back in his apartment, Jiang Su He immediately informed his parents that his new friend had moved into their building. They were genuinely delighted by the news, as their son making friends was nothing short of a major achievement. Upon learning that this friend lived right across from them, his mother immediately suggested inviting him over for dinner. However, Jiang Su He offered to take dinner to him himself, and as if on cue, his father handed him several containers of food, instructing him to go and have a good time. It wasn't long before Chung Yu was struggling with his homework. An unexpected knock at the door startled him, but what threw him even more was seeing Jiang Su He through the peephole, holding containers of food. Opening the door, the blonde asked what he wanted, and when he was invited to share dinner, he immediately declined. He was about to close the door, but Jiang Su He's foot stopped it. He kept pressing, playing on Chung Yu's guilt, saying his father had worked hard on the meal and would be terribly disappointed if he didn't at least try it. Less than 5 minutes later, the protagonist was already wolfing down the food. The brunette couldn't hide his satisfied smile, asking if Chung Yu liked the meal. Chung Yu admitted it was delicious and asked him to pass along his thanks to Jiang Su He's father. As he looked around, Jiang Su He noticed that Chung Yu lived alone. The apartment looked rather empty and lonely. A light conversation ensued between the two, though Chung Yu wished the brunette would leave sooner. Suddenly, he spotted the perfect opportunity to attempt his mission once again. The blonde intended to infuse his drink with magical power to knock Jiang Su He out, then get him to drink it and complete his task while he was unconscious. Having completed the first step, the protagonist handed the brunette the glass, urging him to take a drink. But Jiang Su He hesitated, instantly detecting the scent of magic. This reaction sent a wave of panic through Chung Yu. He wanted to believe it was just his imagination. Fortunately, Jiang Su He drank the contents of the glass without a word, seemingly unaware of the magical essence mixed within. The protagonist had little time left, so he needed to finish what he had come to do as quickly as possible. Grabbing his head, the brunette began muttering something about feeling unwell while Chung Yu silently watched. When Jiang Su-he lifted his gaze, he saw Yu standing before him. Blushing, he admitted that this form was much more familiar to him. Then the boy collapsed completely, wrapped in threads of magic controlled by the blonde. What Chung Yu sought was a daisy, hidden deep within the other's heart. Upon regaining consciousness, Jiang Su he mumbled that Yu had returned when the sweet peas bloomed out of season. Chung Yu couldn't comprehend how the boy was still conscious, despite being under such a powerful spell. At first glance, he appeared as dazed as Li Qixin, and the protagonist assumed he was under his influence. Regardless, Chung Yu didn't care. He was determined to complete his mission and take what he had come for. However, the flower embedded in the other's heart resisted, refusing to budge. Jiang Su-he clutched his chest, saying it hurt. The attempts to extract it were clearly causing him discomfort. Chung Yu realized this task was far more difficult than he had imagined and faltered for a brief moment. That brief moment was enough for the brunette to fall to his knees, reaching out with a trembling hand, telling the blonde how much he had missed him. Year after year, day after day, there wasn't a single moment when he hadn't longed for Yu. Li Qixin had feared that by the time Yu returned, he would no longer be in this world. Grabbing the blonde's clothes, the boy sank to the ground, embracing him tightly and pressing his cheek against him. He was overjoyed that the gods had given him a chance to see Yu again, and he thanked them from the bottom of his heart. Lifting his gaze, the brunette suddenly asked if Yu remembered the day they made a vow to each other in a field of flowers. In truth, Li Qixin had wanted to tell him something else that day, but he hadn't had the chance. Just as now, Chung Yu once again tried to extract the flower from the other's chest, causing excruciating pain that made the brunette double over. Despite the agony, Jiang Su he found the strength to revert to his true form, stating that he must say what he couldn't say before, no matter the cost. Seeing the real Li Qixin before him, Chung Yu was startled, thinking he had accidentally pulled out the sentient soul, which was why the other's appearance had changed. Giving him the chance to speak, the blonde watched in disbelief. He couldn't fathom that Li Qixin had truly returned. Li Qixin stood up, shyly confessing that he wanted Yu to be his beloved. Chung Yu froze, almost falling for the sweet words, but he didn't allow himself to be swayed. He kept reminding himself that it was only the sentient soul of Li Qixin influencing him. This couldn't possibly be real. Gathering his resolve, the blonde pushed Jiang Su-he away and once again attempted to retrieve what he had come for. As the boy groaned in pain, Chung Yu suddenly realized that it was impossible to separate the souls. He tried again and again, but in the end, he gave up, deciding he needed to think carefully about his next move. Jiang Su-he's body went limp again, collapsing into Chung Yu's arms. After a few seconds, the boy regained consciousness, glancing around and wondering why he was standing in someone else's room. The protagonist looked dejected and said nothing, handing the containers back to their owner and asking him to leave the apartment immediately. Jiang Su-he didn't understand what was going on, much less what had just happened, but his only response was the sound of the door slamming shut behind him. Left alone, Chung Yu collapsed to the floor, feeling utterly drained. It had been far more difficult than he had anticipated. The mystery of why Jiang Su-he and Li Qixin's souls couldn't be separated puzzled him, as it was clear they were two distinct beings. His strength was almost entirely depleted, so the blonde decided to conserve his energy. Until he accomplished his goal, he wouldn't be able to replenish his spiritual qi. It took Zibia quite some time to track down where Chung Yu was living, and how overjoyed she was when she finally succeeded. Soon, she was planning to pay him a visit. The protagonist's sleep was restless, and he didn't even notice that he had overslept. Fortunately for him, it was still not even 7 in the morning, which meant only one thing. He had 3 days and 17 hours left to complete his mission. Leaping out of bed, the boy began strategizing his next move, but first, he needed to retrieve Jiang Su-he's personal file. After studying it, Chung Yu became certain that the souls had fused into one, and it was no surprise that all his previous attempts to separate them had failed. The blonde suspected that this wouldn't be easy or quick, but now he had only one option: to extract the main soul and then forcefully sever it from the body. What mattered most was to avoid wasting unnecessary energy and time, and he needed to craft a plan that, regardless of the situation, would make the environment conducive to success. Having completed all the necessary actions to locate the target point, Chung Yu felt a slight disappointment. The search area was indeed vast. Moreover, it was crucial that no one realized his friend was in on the plan. So he decided to leave early the next day and check into a hotel. Upon returning home, Jiangsu he spent a long time contemplating what had happened while he was unconscious. The brunette began to wonder if he had somehow offended Cheng Yu, as that seemed the only way to explain the hurt expression on the blonde's face. He was deeply concerned about what had truly transpired and why he had blacked out in the first place. The truth was, Li Chiqin had no idea what Yu had gone through over the past few thousand years, and being near him now, he could feel there was an invisible wall between them. He desperately wanted to break down that wall and was willing to do whatever it took to bare his soul to Yu completely. At some point, Li Tixin realized that this approach might be too direct, and the blonde might not understand, or worse, he might come to hate him. So the boy decided not to rush things, opting for a more intimate yet subtle approach, pretending to be sweet and innocent, hoping to gradually win his way into Yu's heart. Or, more simply, just personally ask Yu about everything tomorrow when they were at school. However, Cheng Yu left the apartment much earlier, aiming to gain time and avoid running into his neighbor in the hallway. Jiang Suhe, unaware of this, was determined as he knocked on the closed door. The protagonist slipped out through the back entrance, careful to avoid the security cameras. Pulling up his hood, he moved through the alleyways, leaving a small mark behind, a white ribbon tied to a flower, something that would be useful later. After waiting in vain for an answer, Jiang Su, he finally realized that the blonde had left earlier, meaning they would have to talk at school. Sitting in his seat, Cheng Yu glanced around, searching for the boy who was suspiciously late. The sudden hush that fell over the classroom made the protagonist look up at the door, where Jiang Su He appeared, grinning from ear to ear. However, as the brunette approached, Cheng Yu lowered his head, signaling with his demeanor that he had no intention of speaking. In truth, this was all part of Cheng Yu's plan. Once his neighbor sat down, the blonde accidentally dropped his pen. It rolled to Jiang Su He's feet, and when he picked it up, he found a small note attached, meant just for him. The note said that the blonde wanted to discuss the previous day's incident somewhere away from prying eyes. News that made the brunette practically wag his tail with excitement, if he had one. However, the note also contained a request to pretend they were strangers while at school, and Jiang Su he obediently complied, willing to do anything to get closer to Cheng Yu. He Ping An, noticing the smile on Jiang Su He's face, frowned in displeasure, for he too was a god in disguise, though none of the boys knew this yet. As soon as the lesson ended, Cheng Yu stood up and casually made his way to the door, acting as he always did. Jiang Su He had to wait 3 minutes before following, stopping right in front of the local supermarket. The note instructed him to find a white ribbon, so the boy began scanning his surroundings. It didn't take long to find. It was lying quite visibly near a plant. Walking directly into the alley, the brunette still had no idea that this was all a trap, meticulously planned by Cheng Yu. Once he reached the meeting spot, Jiang Su he felt something hard begin to wrap around his ankle. Looking down, he saw a branch that certainly hadn't been there a moment ago when he passed. Suddenly, he heard Cheng Yu's voice coming from deeper in the alley, prompting him to rush to help. However, Cheng Yu was already ensnared. In fact, thick branches appearing from nowhere had wrapped around his entire body, leaving him unable to move. From the shadows, He Ping An slowly emerged, but the protagonist immediately realized it wasn't him. The scent was completely different from what he knew. With a frightened voice, Cheng Yu asked who stood before him, but the stranger remained silent, looking at him with a sympathetic gaze. Then, a divine seal appeared in the air, and in place of He Ping An stood Zibie, someone Cheng Yu certainly hadn't expected to see so soon. The girl mockingly teased the boy, laughing at his reaction to her sudden appearance. She also reminisced about the times they spent together in their childhood. But Cheng Yu cut her off, asking her to stop and explain why she had come. As it turned out, Zibie was there to check on his progress. Heavenly beings had sensed something strange and sent her to investigate. Cheng Yu wasn't particularly impressed by this news, but he still shared how he had encountered a significant problem during the mission: the fusion of the souls into one. He had tried several times to separate them, but nothing worked, and he was about to make another attempt when Zibie disrupted his plans. Zibie laughed, saying that was exactly why she had come. She found the current situation strange as well. However, she admitted that it was indeed extraordinary. In all of history, there hadn't been a case where three souls had fused so deeply with another. Their lighthearted conversation was suddenly interrupted by Jiang Su-hee's unexpected arrival, nearly scaring Zibier to death as she sipped her coffee. But Jiang Su-hee's interest lay elsewhere. He was focused on Cheng Yu, who was still tightly bound by the tree's branches. The blonde remained nonchalant, asking how the boy had managed to get to this place, as the path was closed to ordinary people. Jiang Su-he laughed, reminding him that he was no ordinary person and could easily see through such enchantments. Turning around, the brunette introduced himself to Zibier, who felt uneasy around him. It was her first time seeing a mortal with such an oppressive aura. Despite this, the two quickly struck up a friendship, casually discussing the fact that Cheng Yu was still bound by the tree. Moments later, they were sitting and enjoying coffee together. Resting his chin on his hand, Jiang Su-hee brought up the topic of his soul's separation, causing both of his new companions to freeze, not daring to utter a word. In this case, the protagonist had no choice but to use a small amount of his power to put the boy to sleep and later tell him it had all been a dream. Drawing attention to himself, Cheng Yu suggested they grab something to eat together, and Jiang Su-hee agreed. ZB quickly saw through his plan and suggested to her companion that he just tell the truth. After so many failed attempts, maybe the brunette would understand on his own and even help somehow. The blonde froze, glaring at his friend with judgment. He wanted to curse, but he couldn't even think of a strong enough word for the situation. On one hand, ZB was right. Explaining the situation could save both time and energy. Without much hesitation, Cheng Yu explained that there were two souls residing within Jiang Su-hee, but the second soul wasn't his. It belonged to Li Qiqin, and it had a profound influence on him. Refusing to believe what was said, the boy jumped up from his seat. He remembered things far too clearly. For example, he remembered that Yu had OCD and was always arranging things in a precise order. He was picky about food, with peculiar tastes, and also had a compulsive obsession with cleanliness. Jiang Su-hee also recalled that Yu was stubborn, lacked a sense of humor, and his reactions were slightly delayed. Cheng Yu felt insulted, not understanding why the boy only seemed to remember his flaws, when suddenly ZB, for some reason, agreed with him. The blonde politely asked her to shut up, then sighed heavily, explaining that these things might have influenced his memory. Realizing that his evidence wasn't enough, Jiang Su-hee added another, even more personal detail, crossing all boundaries, at which point it was Cheng Yu's turn to tell him to shut up, feeling even worse. He couldn't comprehend how the person before him could remember such intimate details. Taking a step forward, Jiang Su-hee asked him not to be angry, saying that even though the blonde might dislike it, he found all these quirks utterly endearing. Moreover, the fact that Cheng Yu couldn't separate their souls only proved in his eyes that he was Li Qiqin. The protagonist wished it could be that simple. Memory was only one aspect, and more importantly, it was the easiest to influence. Additionally, Jiang Su-hee's heart was affected by another energy, and if it were an ordinary heart, it wouldn't have survived. Asking Zibier to finally release him, Cheng Yu exhaled in relief once he was back on his feet. Continuing his explanation, he demonstrated what a normal soul should look like: transparent, with nothing extra within. However, when something foreign invades the soul, an element is introduced, influencing the original soul. Such was the case with Jiang Su-hee's soul. The brunette speculated that maybe, by some strange chance, his case was unique. Relying solely on these superficial similarities, it couldn't be definitively proven that he wasn't Li Qiqin. Cheng Yu realized that solving the issue wouldn't be as simple as giving an explanation. The boy was stubborn, making it clear that he wouldn't back down. Jiang Su-hee's argument was that the blonde had no other proof. Though he didn't outwardly resemble Li Qiqin, the brunette was confident that, over time, Cheng Yu would come to accept it. Unable to take any more of this mockery, the protagonist grabbed the boy by his shirt, pulling him close. He suggested they go to the underworld, saying that perhaps they could find the evidence there. Jiang Su-hee played dumb, saying that it all sounded very dangerous. And by the way, he still had a pile of homework to do and would need to explain everything to his parents. Yet, despite his reluctance, it wasn't a refusal. He was willing to try, on the condition that he would definitely return afterward.